This is the N64RGB kit version 3. What you get in the kit is obviously the board and a flat ribbon cable to help you install it into the console. Optionally, you can also purchase this fine pitch adapter. That's for the later Nintendo 64 consoles that have a video encoder chip that is of a finer pitch. That is, the legs on the chip are closer together. It makes soldering a little harder, and this adapter piece can be used for that. The N64 I'm installing this kit into today has the Denknuz video encoder, which is an older one which has the bigger spacing on the legs and is easier to solder into. For comparison's sake, the board on the left is the older version 2 N64RGB and the one on the right is the new version 3. At a glance they look the same, but there are differences on the board. The three main features or new features of the version 3 are in-game reset via controller hotkeys. You can simply reset your game in-game with a combination of buttons on controller 1. The next addition of version 3 is the ability to switch on the Deblur function on and off via the controller. On older versions, on version 2, the Deblur function was changed by a switch, a physical switch installed to the outside of the Nintendo 64. Version 3 also can have that physical switch, as well as the controller method, which is more convenient. Thirdly, and perhaps the most important change, is that the new version can also output component video. Previous versions enabled RGB output. Version 3 enables either RGB output or component output via a jumper selection. There are a number of other small changes, however those three things I have just spoken about are the most important. As mentioned before, the video encoder in this Nintendo 64 is the Denknuz style one. This chip here, I've got a flux pen and I'm going to put some flux on the legs where I'm going to solder to. It's on this side of the chip, that side of the chip only. Put some flux on there and I will solder some solder onto each of the legs to make it easier to attach the wires soon. Turn that around for me. Clean that solder tip. Heat that leg up. Blob it up. Blob up that first leg. Pin number 1, pin number 2, and so on. Alright, so they're blobbed up quite well. Blobbed is the term I like to use. Then we'll go around to the multi-out side, the underside of the board to the multi-out area. Pin number 1 is where red will connect to. Pin number 2 is where green will connect to. Pin number 4 is where blue will connect to. Blob up the solder joints on the ground, pin 5 and 6. Number 6. I'll also give pin number 3 sync. Just to blob up, I might use that. And also video. I may not necessarily do something with the video here, but I just do it as a matter of habit. Sometimes it just all depends on what sort of sync you're going to organise with this RGB board. Do some similar things to this board here. Get some solder ready. Put it around that way. Solder up. Obviously I'm going to use blue, green, red, ground. I'll definitely use those 4 spots. We'll also use control and reset. I'm not sure about switch, but it doesn't matter if you put some solder on. It's not going to change anything with just a blob of solder put onto the solder pad. Denknuz. That's the right side here. That's for the ribbon cable running From this mod board to that video encoder chip, there's also the VDC NUS on the left side, but I've got the DENK NUS, so we go with that one. Blob them up. You know, it doesn't matter. See that I've blobbed 2 pins together, I've shorted them together. It's pretty easy to actually fix. You can just give it a wipe like that. So don't stress if you bridge these joints down here. It's easy to fix up. So yeah, it's probably getting, that one's a bit big. Just swipe it like that. And the tip of the soldering iron will take up the excess. So you can be quite hasty here, doesn't matter. Again, another one that's bridged, just wipe it like that and it's all good. It's nice and plump, it's just the right size. And I think that's all I need to solder. There are JP 1, 2 and 3. That depends on the SCART cable you're using. I leave them open by default. Next I need 12 wires for the N64RGB to the DENK NUS chip. I need to separate 12 off or make a split. Oh, I need to get one more off that. So that should give me 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. See, that's enough. It's best to keep the wires no longer than 300 millimeters. This one's 31.5 centimeters, so it definitely needs to be cut down a bit. I'll cut it down more substantially than that. It's going to run from that chip, fold over there and go through there and come back up around here on the top. You think I'd have this down to an exact science by now, to exact length, but I'll cut off probably where my thumb is there, just to shorten it down a bit. And then I'll start off separating each wire. It's quite a time consuming part of the job to do it like this. Okay, that end's done. And then I'll separate the other ends wires. Now I'll strip them all individually. Just give it a few millimeters off the end. Now that all the wires are stripped on both ends, I'm going to twirl around the frayed wires to get them bound, to get each individual, get all the strands rotated, wrapped around to make them neat and not straggly. This is where a solder pot would be good, or where I could quite possibly dip the entire lot. What I like to do now is straighten it all up, straighten them all up so they're all much pretty equal to one, like they're all together, they're all straight. I like to have the wires cut shorter than that for going onto the N64, no, actually for the DAC, for the video encoder chip. So what I mean is, I might just make them, just pull them straight. They're all pretty uniform in length. They're all pretty uniform in length, but I might give them a little bit of a haircut for my liking, to solder them onto the legs of that DENK NUS chip. That's okay, and I'll leave the other ends long for the N64RGB board. There's two ways you could go about this. You could solder on the wires in this direction with the cable facing like that, and then you fold it back over, or you can just solder it as such on that side like that, which is what I'm going to do. And I don't really think it makes any real difference, to be honest, but I've tended to go like this now. So I'm going to solder this cable on, black wire to pin number 1. Can be useful to give the wires a bend downwards, get them on the angle somewhat that the chip legs are on the same angle. Just bend that cable a bit. And the first one's probably the easiest one. The actual wires on the ends are often the easiest, because you've got no chip on the other side opposing you. Here on the corner it's kind of easy. So I'll just heat that up. Like so, give it a bit of a couple of seconds to set. Cold. Tweezers are very useful for this type of work. So I can grab the wire. Zoom in a little bit. Zoom in. Grab that wire with the tweezers and bend it down. Just want to get it like so. Heat up that solder joint, that leg. Hold it like such. Good. Do it again. Bend that wire down a bit so it's on a good angle to meet the leg of the chip. Pin number 3. And then again, heat up the leg. Yeah, that's good. What you can do to test the strength of your solder joint is grab the wire that you've soldered on already and give it a bit of a wiggle. Give it a gentle tug. If it's on weakly, you'll find that it'll be quite loose and it may also pull off. So if you just give them a gentle tug and they feel firm, your solder joints are probably good. And I'll continue on soldering the rest of these wires in. All those wires are soldered onto there. If you want to be thorough, and you should do this at some stage, but even right now, before we've even soldered the other end of the wires, we can just check for shorts. If I don't get any beeps, I'm right. The next step is to solder those wires that are now coming from the video encoder to the N64RGB board. There is no particular order of steps, but this is how I'm doing it now. Now it's important that obviously that you solder the wires to the correct column, DENK, as in this case, not VDC. But also make sure you're soldering the correct wires that you can go 2 ways, couldn't you? Well, you can't go 2 ways, but you could accidentally go the wrong way. I've got pin 1 of the video encoder, the black wire, which is D0, and D0 is there. So I've got to make sure that I start with that black wire in this corner of the mod board, because if I go that way and solder them all on, it's going to be completely wrong and then I'm going to desolder it. So you want to make sure that you've got that correct when you start. This is easier to do than the video encoder, the DENK NUS. Fairly similar in theory. You're soldering to the same sort of pitch. You'll notice I've got a clamp here. That's what that is. That's a clamp holding the board down on the edge of my workbench so things don't move around as much. I get the next one. A bit off kilter there. Adequate. Also be careful when doing this to not go past the wire you need to solder it. You might get, I need to solder this grey one. I'll zoom in a bit. I need to solder this grey one next, but if I accidentally grab the purple one, everything subsequent to that, including that one's going to be in the wrong order. There we go, all those wires are done. I'm going to check it under a magnifying glass. Next, I'm going to solder the remainder of the ribbon cable. Off camera, I peeled off 1 wire. I want 6. 6 is more than enough. I'm not even going to use all 6 wires, but I like having a couple extras just in case I want to do some more work on the sinks. The wires are ready. I'll attach the red wire to pin 1, which is where the red colour will be delivered. Heat up this pin 2 for the green, pin 3 or 4 for blue, and then the ground wire. I've left this wire a little longer because it needs to cover both grounds. Both grounds run in parallel there. Come on. just like that. Stop moving on me. Heat there, so that's good. The ground wire's connected. The orange and yellow wires floating there have not been stripped, so there's no wire inside exposed. They're simply in case I want to do any modifications with the sink in the future. The wires are perfectly fine floating about where they are. This is an important point to talk about. The console's own composite video comes out of pin 9 here where V is. Usually I leave that as is, so the console still has composite video, and it also has a sync in that signal for the RGB. In Tim's guide on the installation of this, it says here, the original composite video signal is normally used for sync. Some people claim this causes a small amount of interference to the RGB video, particularly with cheap cables. In my experience, that is true with cheap eBay cables, for example. There will be a little bit of interference traveling through the screen on a cheap cable if you use the native composite video from the console. If you're using an upscaler like the Retro Tink 5 X, or X5 as it's probably called, I don't have one, that thing is very sensitive to sync signals. So if you've got an issue with it not working properly on a Nintendo 64, your better option may be to check carefully what SCART cable you're using and use either composite sync or composite sync 75 on the N64RGB board. You can cut the trace to this pin and solder there, your sync, or even do the same on pin 3, cut the trace there and put your sync into that. But that all depends on the cable and the device you're using in your chain or at the end of your chain. If you're just using a CRT television, SCART television, then you're going to be pretty right. They're not particularly fussy at all, whereas the upscalers are more so. The next step is to work on this PIF NUS chip. This is for the in-game reset via the controller. This is new. This is new to this mod. It requires one wire to be soldered onto pin 27 of the PIF NUS chip. It's about the same pitch as that video chip from before, the video encoder. It's a little bit, yeah, that's alright, that'll do it. What we need to do now is solder a wire from that pin 27 to the NES RGB board, specifically a reset pad on the N64RGB. I should add while I'm here, I just talked about the white wire, or a wire that goes to pin 27, and in conjunction with that there's another wire that also needs to go to the N64RGB board for the controller functions of Deblur and in-game reset. What you need to do, or what you can do, is you've got to solder a wire to one of the 3 pins on controller port 1, and the 3 pins are accessible to my multimeter where I'm poking now. But rather than running a wire from here over this side of the board up to the N64RGB board there, what you can do is, and Tim's instructions take you through this, but I'll explain it a little bit more, is that there's a spot around here, one of these via holes that travels to that pin, that middle pin on controller port 1. Right there. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in. Zoom in. So that PIF NUS chip that's involved in reset, right there, it's just that hole. There's 3 holes there, it's the bottom right according to my orientation. So white wire, or any colour wire, but a wire from pin 27 there and a wire to that via hole there will give you in-game reset and the deblur function via controller. For the via hole, I like to scrape these just to, you know, if there's any lacquer on the board, PS1s in the days of mod chips had to get access to these holes to solder wires, and it paid to give them a bit of a scrape to get to the copper underneath, to get a good foundation for soldering. So that's what I'm doing there. I'm scoring that via the via. I'll put a little blob of solder in there. That's not too bad. It just fills the hole up and gives something to enable a wire to be soldered to it. Both wires are soldered in, pin 27 and the middle pin of controller port 1, the middle of the 3. They need to be soldered onto the N64RGB board now. The white wire that's on pin 27 of PIF NUS for reset goes onto the reset pad, and the black wire that's connected to the controller port, not directly but at a distance on that via, connects to the pad named control. I've wired up the switch for the Deblur function. Again, let me remind you, you don't have to use the physical switch anymore. You can do it with the controller now on this version 3 revision. In fact, this kit no longer comes with a slide switch. However, I am going to demonstrate for the sake of showing how it's done. If you want to use a physical switch, and you can use both the physical and the controller. There's 6 posts on these slide switches. Doesn't matter too much. The point is where you put the wires. You put one in the middle and one next to it, either side, like so, and then you solder the 2 wires, one to ground, doesn't matter if it's the yellow or the green, and one to the pad labeled switch. That's your Deblur switch there. It's just a matter of mounting this switch somewhere through a vent hole on your N64 to get access to it. So there's just enough of the post of the switch, of the lever I should say, accessible for you to change that via the outside of your console. I'm going to mount the Deblur switch in one of the vent holes here. For that reason, I'm cleaning the dust off. I'm using hot glue to secure it in, but I want a clean area to mount it first. It's almost finished. Don't forget to put on any heat sinks you may have taken off the chips. I like to take off that heat sink there to get a bit more clearance to do the soldering work. If you turn on your console long enough without the heat sinks on your fright, you'll get away with it for a little while, but not forever. The shielding plate will go back on the console, but first it's necessary to make a modification. That is on this corner here. You want to use some pliers to bend up that metal piece, just like that. And then when you place this down, you'll be able to run the flat ribbon cable from the DENK NUS chip, or whichever video encoder you've got, up through that gap there that you've created now. I think I've actually gone a bit short on the reset length of wires, but in any case I'll try and manage it. What you want to do with this cable here is put a fold over it like so. See that fold there? Run it next to the capacitors, just put a fold there, and then you can put your metal shielding normally back on. But this, see if I can work it down the bottom here. It might be alright. There you go. As long as I can get that N64RGB board to mount around about there, that should be alright. As I said, this cable's a little bit short for my liking, but I think I can make do. See how this cable comes out where we bent that metal tab? Plenty of room for it. That's good. Make sure your heatsink plate, this one, is clean. I'm cleaning it off camera with a cloth, just giving it a wipe to get the dust off it. It sits in there, and this adhesive strip, this is an adhesive strip. You take that blue tape off and then stick it on there. That's why I cleaned it, to give it a nice smooth clean surface. And I think I'll do that right now. I've put a few screws into the console to hold things in place. I don't want to fully assemble the console yet. I want to test it, but I want to have it in a state that it's reasonably secure. So the adhesive's off. I've stuck it in place. Don't go too close to these screw holes. You need to screw it up, and you need to have room to get in there and put a screw in there as well. The last soldering job to do is an additional ground wire. Let's hope this just doesn't fling out on me. Whoop, yeah, like that. I want to get these. A little bit messy, but that's all right. So this is an additional ground wire that simply goes to the heat sink plate. So I'll put a screw in there, partially screwed up. And then with this end of the wire here, that's not tinned with solder, that's just bare as it was. What I need to do is to put that exposed part of the wire underneath the screw and then screw the screw in tightly to get that wire, that grounding wire, touching well with the ground plate. It's metal, so it gives an additional grounding point. I think it's a good idea, even if you've checked for continuity for any shorts in your work during your installation, once you've got everything in place and finalised, that board's in its final resting place, assuming it all works properly, it's good again to test for any shorts, because as you've assembled it, you've bent cables around and put strain on the wires, and it means that a wire underneath on the video chip could have come loose. So I think it's a good idea to do another check, particularly for ground and 3.3 volts. So you can just check your joints. Now I'm going to beep from time to time, but I think that's just more my touching of the probes. Ground to ground. You can grab a ground point there, and that's ground, and that one's ground. As long as you know what you're touching, you can get a confirmation of these things. I'm ready to test the console now. Don't forget about the heat sinks. If you don't have the heat sinks on, don't leave it turned on for more than 30 seconds. I don't even have all the screws back in the heatsink plates, and I wouldn't leave it on for hours like that either. I'm going to test composite video first because that's still left intact, and I'm going to build up to the RGB. Don't forget your jumper pack or memory expansion. If that's not plugged in, the console won't turn on. Alright, I've got NASCAR in there. Good. This is in composite video, remember? English. Now the reset should work. Controller reset. Z plus start plus R up the top plus A and then B. Good. Very good. I'm happy with that. Let's try RGB now. SCART cables connected instead of the composite cable. Power on. Good. Image is there. Start the game. Let's try this time the Deblur option via both methods, the toggle switch and the controller option. I'll zoom in so the screen can be seen a bit better. Hopefully. Right, so to do this Deblur on and off, it's Z plus start plus R plus C left. Oh, shut up. That's not what I want. I don't know if the camera is going to pick that up or not. Probably not. It's not in focus at all. But it is working, I can assure you that. Here's our hot glue gun. Our cheapo from Bunnings. Zoom in. It'll go in one of the vents around here. Take your pick. Got a little bit of room to work with it. Hopefully you can see this on camera. It's going to be a bit dark, a bit crowded. Hold it there with my finger. And then you can get quite liberal with this stuff. Just pour it in. This is the greatest glue ever invented, this stuff. The beauty of it is if you make an error, you can easily reverse it. Once this stuff sets, you can pick away at it, and it's removable. It's fully removable, unlike super glue. For those who don't like their consoles physically modified, you can completely reverse the process with this so that it's just how it was from factory virtually. I've got a fair gollop of glue on there, and that needs to set. That needs a good 10 minutes or so to set in. And once that stuff's hard, it's pretty strong. It's resilient against force. Console's back together. Glue's dried on the switch here. I can click it up and down. I want to give you a better example of the Deblur switch in action. I'll slow the shutter speed down on my camera. Now the text there is smooth, and if I switch the Deblur switch, see that? It's more blocky, jagged. Back to smooth. So it makes a big difference on some things like the text there. I hope this video will help you install your N64RGB kit. If you need any kits or you'd like it to be installed, please contact me and I can take care of it for you. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.